Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Big Game Hunters. I'm Mike.
I'm Tom.
We had to cut Season 1 a little short due to scheduling conflicts, but now we're back with even more games.
We have a new show format to discuss. There's a new section called The Breakdown. It breaks apart the game and gives you a rundown of all the different aspects of what makes a game interesting.
Mm-hmm. And we've rolled the player corner into the chit chat. So the chit chat's going to cover a wider variety of topics now, but we hope to keep the same level of quality with it. Today's chit chat is going to go over the breakdown in more detail because it's a really new section and we just like to codify everything first.
There's a lot to cover. Today's game is Pocket Battles. It's a small war game, easily affordable. Anything else to say about it real quick?
It was promised in Season 1 and now we're picking right up with it.
Cool. When we're done reviewing it, we're going to hang it on the trophy wall.
We hope you enjoy the show. Hi, and welcome to the very first chit chat of the new season. As you may remember from last season, we were planning on doing the expansions chit chat along with Pocket Battles, but we want more time to talk about the new format, so we're going to be moving that to next episode. In today's chit chat, which we'll also be opening with from now on, we're going to talk about our new breakdown.
So think of the breakdown as a stat sheet for a board game. It's a series of attributes that are broken up into paired and opposed metrics sliding on a scale of 1 or 0 to 100.
Mm-hmm. It's important to remember that these are not compared to other board games. This is simply a percentage of one attribute or another that a game possesses. So if we say that a game has 75 of one attribute and 25 of the other, then we're saying that it's not in comparison to other games. It's just what measure of each it possesses.
So you may remember from a previous episode the short and long metric. Short and long is the relative length of a game it takes to play. So if a game feels like it plays out pretty shortly, or if a game does play, it's not feel. If a game plays out pretty shortly, it's short. If it takes longer to play, it's long.
Yeah, short and long are an objective measure, as opposed to fast and slow. Fast and slow measures how fast a game feels like it's moving. So if you're really engaged on your turn and you're fully engaged on your opponent's turn, that usually ends up being a fast game. Last season, we talked about various games of these fast, but a slow game we mentioned was Carcassonne. Carcassonne doesn't take very long to play, but it's very slow. You're only active on your own turn, and you don't have much of an investment on other players' turns.
Our next metric is luck and skill. And this measures the driving mechanics of the game. So if it's a really skill-based game where the experience or analysis of the player, it determines the outcome of the game, you'd call it a skill game. On the other hand, if it's random factors like deck drawing, dice rolling, that's a real luck-based game, and we'd give it a high luck rating.
Yeah, and again, I think we should emphasize that that's not necessarily a negative thing. A lot of players like very luck-driven games. A lot of players gravitate towards more skill-based games. These are not positive or negative measures.
Right.
We're also talking about, so within luck and skill, really within skill, we have strategy and tactics. Strategy is a measure of how much of the game is built up from one turn to the next. So a very strategic game would be something like a deck-building game, where your decisions are very much prefaced on your previous plays. A tactical game, by contrast, is something where you're just trying to maximize your current turn. The board usually changes very rapidly in a tactical game, and you can't look ahead very much.
This is also a good example of a place where you'll see a lot of values that we give it that are in the middle of the board, and that's because a lot of games that require a lot of skill split these two things up pretty evenly. So just because we give a game a 50-50 in strategy and tactics doesn't mean they're both used equally. Yeah, they're just used a lot. Mm-hmm. Interaction and independence. That's how we measure the way players at a table interact or don't. Mm-hmm. What would you say an example of a style of game that's independent?
An independent game would be, I think Race for the Galaxy is pretty independent. We're going to end up giving that a very independent score because while every player chooses a phase, and that can affect your play, for the most part, you're sitting there and playing solitaire.
So is that true of all tableau builders? Or?
It can be, not necessarily.
And a highly interactive game?
That would be a one-on-one, like chess, for instance. Chess is a completely interactive game. Every move is a response in some way to your opponent's move.
Our next metric is immersion versus abstraction. A highly immersive game is one that engages the player with the theme of the game through its mechanics usually, for example, with an event deck or a spell deck. A highly abstract game is basically the opposite. If you're more concerned at the table with what's going on and the elements in play rather than what they represent, the game is abstract.
Mm-hmm. We're also going to talk about simplicity and complexity. A simple game is one with a pretty shallow learning curve. It's one that maybe the rule book is pretty short and sweet. It's very easy to get, your grandma to come over and play. It's a very simple game. A complex game, by contrast, is one that you see set up and it looks intimidating. A complex game has a higher learning curve, often quite a tome for a rule book. There's a lot of meat to it, but it's hard to get into it.
Yeah. The next metric is portable versus grandeur. So obviously, portable game is usually small, something you would take to a friend's house or a game store to play. And the opposite end is a grand game. A game full of grandeur is one that takes up a lot of shelf space or table space. Maybe it has a ton of expansions, or it's highly collectible.
And often a grandiose game looks great set up. That's kind of the upswing of that one. And then we're going to discuss a game's expandability. So you mentioned a game with a lot of expansions. By contrast, we'll talk about a game's completeness. So a highly expandable game is one where the pieces of the game can very easily be added to. It's something where there's the core mechanics you can have content thrown in very easily, and the publisher is going to keep releasing new stuff for them in all likelihood. A complete game is one that feels like everything's there right out of the box. That feels like you have the complete experience as soon as you crack it open. And this one's one where a 50-50 measure is pretty frequent, I think, because even though a game might have a lot of content that could be added to it, it might also feel like you're getting enough for your dollar. You might feel like, this game has a lot of replay value, even if we didn't add anything to it.
But many of those games lend themselves to expanded content.
Mm-hmm.
So our last two metrics are not rated on a sliding scale of 1 to 100. They're rather rated with trophies.
Mm-hmm.
1 to 5 trophies. Think of them like stars, but
they're trophies.
It's a theme. And
we want you to be immersed in the show. We feel like this show should be highly immersive.
Rather than abstract. Our first metric is originality. So this started as if the game brings something new to the table or to the genre or just to games in general. And now it's sort of evolved to also include just doing something well in the genre that other games in that genre doesn't.
And in a creative way, ideally.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And our last metric?
So finally, we'll be talking about of game's value. This specifically refers to the pieces you're getting out of the box and how much you're paying for those components. So in the value section, we're also awarding it trophies, 1 to 5. And a game with 5 trophies, you're going to get really nice components, good card stock, nice cardboard, maybe some pre-painted miniatures, and you're going to get them for what we feel is a fair price. There might be games that don't get a lot of trophies in value because even though they look great set up, they have great pieces, they last a long time, but maybe we feel they're a little overcosted. And so that's how we're going to break down value.
During the breakdown section of the show, I'm going to break down each attribute and tell you why we gave it the rating we gave it. You'll be able to see all the breakdowns we do for all the games we do on our website. Right there. And now Mike is going to teach you Pocket Battles.
Today on Big Game Hunters, we're going to be taking a look at Pocket Battles. It's a miniature war game that can fit in your pocket, and it uses these tiles instead of traditional sculpted miniatures. The goal of the game is to eliminate half of your opponent's squad by cost. When you do so, that triggers game end. You play out the round, and at the end of said round, whoever has more points, again, based on cost, wins. As I mentioned earlier, Pocket Battles uses these tiles to replace traditional miniatures. The tiles have various stats on them, including dice size, gold value, troop limit, and health points. The dice sides show on what sides you have to roll to score a hit, with white dice being ranged and black dice being melee. The gold value is how much you have to pay to include it in your army and how much is worth when your opponent kills it. The blue square is troop limit. That's how many troops can be in a single unit. We always use the lowest value to determine the total size of that unit. Finally, health points is how many hits it takes to kill an individual troop. The troops can also have special abilities, as shown here. All the special abilities are listed in a quick guide included with the game. The first thing you have to do in pocket battles is agree to an army total. The rulebook recommends using 50 to 100. I personally like 80. Once you've done so, you and your opponent, in secret, each build an army using that value. The number in the gold circle is how many points it costs to include an individual troop in your army. The number in the blue square next to it is how many individual troops you can have in a given squad. Once you've decided on what troops you're going to use, you'll put them into squads by stacking them, having only one troop visible on top. Once you've built all of your squads, set them to the side and roll to see who goes first. The player who wins the roll may begin the game, and you'll begin by placing your squads into the various zones. There's 6 zones per player: the center, front and rear, the right flank, front and rear, and the left flank, front and rear. Once all the squads have been placed, you splay them and you're ready to begin the game. On your turn, the first thing you can do is a unit redeployment. When you redeploy a unit, you can move it from one zone into any adjacent zone, not diagonally. You can move it, for instance, from the front center into the rear center, the right front, or the left front. After you've redeployed, you may not use the unit that has been redeployed that turn later in the turn. Then you take one of 7 different actions. The first action you can take is a tactical move. When you make a tactical move or take any action with a unit, you must place order tokens on it. You can place 1 order token on it plus 1 order token for every order token already present on the unit. This means that if you use the same unit several times in a round, it takes more order tokens and therefore more effort. Once you've placed the order token on it, a tactical move works just like a redeployment. You move it to any adjacent non-diagonal zone and you're finished, and play passes to your opponent. The next thing you can do is a charge. When you make a charge, you take a unit from any of your front zones and move it into the appropriate engagement zone with your opponent. When it moves into the corresponding engagement zone, your opponent has 2 options to respond. He can either shoot at the incoming unit, or he can intercept with one of his own units. If he chooses to shoot at the oncoming unit, he places an order token on the shooting unit. The shooting unit, of course, must possess ranged abilities. And then he inflicts any casualties before you complete your charge. He rolls dice, 1 die unless there is some modifier, and then he inflicts any casualties. When a casualty is inflicted in pocket battles, you take an order token from your reserve and use the blood side of it to represent a wound. Now, you do not have to use a wound to represent damage. Instead, you can simply remove units for a corresponding amount of damage. So, for instance, if this unit is wounded, I could take, if it took 1 wound, I could eliminate either of the 1 wound pieces from the unit. If it took 2 wounds, I could eliminate the center 2 wound troop. Otherwise, I'll place wounds on the appropriate pieces. So, for instance, if this unit took 1 wound, I could place a token on the mounted guard. This, remember, comes out of my unused order token, so it will mean I can potentially do less in the remaining round. Once the casualties have been inflicted by the shooting unit, then I continue the charge normally. If instead the opponent chooses to intercept, then the opponent activates one of his units in the front of the section that I'm invading, and he moves that into the engagement zone with my unit. Then I will roll dice to attack, and if he has any units remaining, he will roll dice back to swing back. If he does not intercept, then the charge goes through and I choose the defender. Play proceeds just as if he had intercepted, with the attacking unit swinging first and then the charged unit. It's important to remember that when you charge, you roll an additional die. In addition to charging, you can carry on an engagement that's already ongoing. So in the previous example, I mentioned 2 units in the engagement zone of the center section. If the units are not completely wiped out after the initial dice rolls from each player, then we continue to fight. To continue that fight, I must spend order tokens. Remember, I have to spend 1 order token plus 1 for every order token already on the unit. So in this case, I would have to spend 2. Then I would resolve it just as if I had charged, but I do not roll the bonus charge die. One other thing I can do on the turn is leave an engagement. So if I want to get out of an engagement that's ongoing, I simply activate the unit by spending the appropriate number of tokens, and then move it back to the appropriate zone. When I do that, the opponent gets a free swing. They roll 1 die or more if they're modified, and they inflict any casualties upon my unit, and then I move it back. In addition, I can shoot. If I have a unit that possesses ranged dice, the white dice, I can activate it in order to shoot a unit in the front of an opponent's appropriate sector. So if I have a ranged unit in the right front on my side, I can roll the appropriate ranged dice and choose a target on the opponent's right front. When I do that, there is no striking back and no intercepting. I simply roll dice to hit and inflict any casualties. Or, on my turn, I can use a special trait. Special traits are not terribly common, but they will be explained in the quick guide. They cannot be activated on the first turn of the game, and they usually require order tokens. Other than that, their abilities will vary based on the set you own. Finally, if I have nothing else to do in the turn, I can pass. When I pass, I take one of my order tokens and simply remove it. I will get it again next round, but that's all I do on this activation. Once you've done one of your activations, your turn ends and play passes to your opponent. To clarify, the game is played in the series of turns, which make up a battle round. Once one player is out of order tokens, the other player simply activates his units until he is also out of tokens. This triggers the end of the round. At the end of every round, you must check to see if either player has met the victory condition of eliminating half of his opponent's forces. If he has, then the game ends with the player having the most points winning. If not, you begin another battle round and play it out fully. In addition, if your opponent has no units in a given section, you can rout him. For instance, if your opponent has no units in his front center, you may attack or shoot at units in his center rear. In addition, if your opponent has no units in the entire flank or entire center, so for instance, no units in his right front or right rear, then a unit you have in your right front can charge at either his center front or even his center rear. When this happens, when either of those cases happen, your opponent has no opportunity to respond. He may not intercept, and he may not shoot in response. So now that I've shown you how to play the game, we're going to take a look at it. As you may remember from last season, Patrick and I would roll a die to determine who was going to be for the game and who was going to argue against it. Now, today, Tom and I have a genuine disagreement about this game. I really like it. I think it's a hit. Tom,
Nope, not so good.
thinks we should just throw it away. So we're not going to need the die roll today. We're just going to, argue it as it comes naturally. So the first thing I want to talk about with this game is the art. I think that the art's kind of Spartan, but I think the look matches the gameplay perfectly. You have the little men marching across here. I just really like it. It's pretty evocative. I mean, you have the troll. I think he looks good. Alexander himself. I think that really, I know Tom's just waiting for me to show you the Tree Man.
Tree Man is my favorite. He's pretty awesome.
It's hard not to love the Tree Man. So yeah, I think, like I said, it's clean, it's simple, just like the game. I think it just works really well for the pieces. It doesn't clutter them at all. Art's a big hit for me.
I agree. Art is a big selling point for this game. It just matches the style of the game perfectly. The real problem I have is if you're a fan of this game, it's got to be hard to have a release schedule like you have. The game was released originally with Romans and Celts in 2009. A year later, we have Orcs and Elves. A year later, we have Macedonians versus Persians. And it's now over a year later, and we still don't have another set. How does that make you feel?
It does upset me. I have to say, I've been waiting with bated breath for more pocket battles. So yeah, I can't argue with that. It is a really low release schedule. Z-Man Get Publishing, but
well, they are like last year they did talk about an American Civil War expansion, but it's been several months and we haven't heard anything.
yeah, I mean,
else
I guess we'll maybe take a look at that. Maybe add an addendum if that comes out. But yeah, I mean, even with that, it's a gruelingly slow release schedule. Even one a year, I think, is pretty slow, and they haven't even kept that pace. So, and with a game that's that is this expandable, as we'll talk about in the breakdown, I think you really want the content to come out a little more quickly. But that said, it takes a while to squeeze the empires into these boxes. I mean, you open this box up, there's a ton of game here. It's a simple game, but it's deep. There's a lot of gameplay. There's a lot of replayability with building different squads. You have it's small and it's pretty cheap too. So you get a lot for your dollar here. So I think for that reason, I can overlook the slow release schedule because I feel like I got such a great deal out of the boxes that I've already purchased.
You do have a lot for your dollar, sure, but I mean, compare how much time you spend looking at your pieces and building your squad to how much time you spend actually playing the game. I mean, where's the value in that?
That's true, but the squad building for me is kind of a selling point. I don't mind that I'm doing it mostly independently from my opponent. I feel like it's really fun to put the units together the troops together in different configurations. And so I really don't mind that. I don't mind the squad building phase. And I feel like the squad building is a pretty unique mechanic to this game. You don't have too many games where you can so quickly sit down with somebody else and have a deck building kind of experience. I mean, if I sit down with you and want to play Magic the Gathering, it's really hard to just throw something together and play it. Yep. With this, the squad building is simple enough, but complex, but deep enough that you can actually do that in a meaningful way. And also, I think that the other innovative mechanic that they've really gone with here is the order tokens. I think the order tokens and simultaneously the wound tokens work really well in how they're implemented. I think that the idea of when you issue orders to squads and you issue further orders in the same turn, it exhausts them. They find it harder to work with. They're not workhorses. Yeah. They have limits. And I think the idea that when you take wounds and casualties, that cuts into what you can do in the turn later just works really great. It's a very brilliant, clean little mechanic.
Except that it doesn't matter how many order tokens you have because the game is all decided in the first opening roll. I mean, it shouldn't be the roll for who goes first. It should be the roll for who wins. Because on that first turn, the guy who charges first wins. Yes or no?
No, but it is correlated. There is a problem of snowballing with the game.
It might not be that bad. But you have to admit, there's a lot of advantages going first.
I will agree to that. There is a lot of advantage going first. Those early hits are crucial. If your opponent gets lucky and scores some big hits early and you don't answer them immediately, he's going to snowball and he's going to win. And you're not going to make it to the second battle round. So I will agree to that. But, when I play it, one way to get more time out of your squad, especially if you really like your team, your army, is to play best 2 out of 3. When you do that, if you win the opening roll and get to go first, you let your opponent go first the next game, you kind of mitigate that a little bit.
It does seem, with the emphasis on squad building, that is the way this game was almost meant to be played. I kind of wish they would include it in the rules.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's I wouldn't say a variant, but it's the way I like to play it. So now that we've gone through the points and counterpoints, unless you have anything else to add.
I don't think I do.
What are your thoughts on the game as a whole? Like I said, I liked it, but
out of 10, we're doing out of 10, right?
Yeah.
Out of 10, I'm gonna have to give it a 4 out of 10. It's first of all not really my style of game, so that obviously brings it down a little bit. I do like that it's a really nice, clean, simple game. If I'm forced to play a war game, it would probably be this one. But that opening roll and the luck factor, the dice involved, it just brings it down for me too much in regards to war games. 4 to 10.
That's a hard score, Tom. I would say I'm going to double it, give it an 8 on 10 because, like I said, it works for me. It scratches that war game itch without requiring me to invest heavily in a game like Warhammer or War Machine, something that is a hobby unto itself, and it fills that niche for me. And the squad building feels kind of akin to a simple TCG. So for me, it's kind of a lot of different things that I enjoy in one tight, complete package. So for me, 8 out of 10, great game.
There you have it.
So now,
Breakdown.
yeah. So now you know what the game's about and how we feel about it on the whole. Tom's gonna break it down for you.
All right, this is a breakdown for pocket battles. We have Romans versus Celts, Orcs versus Elves, and Macedonians versus Persians. Our first attribute is short versus long. We gave it a 70 in short because it is a short game. The box says 30 minutes. We found that it takes us between 45 minutes and an hour, but that's still pretty short. We ended up with a 30 in long because squad building can drag out if your opponent takes his time. Next up is fast versus slow. We gave it a 75 in fast because you're engaged during squad building, and even on your opponent's turn during gameplay, you're engaged in what he's doing. We gave it a 25 in slow because, again, during squad building, things can feel like they're not really moving. Next up is luck versus skill. We gave it a 35 in luck because it does have a die-driven combat mechanic, and that opening first turn is pretty harsh. But at its heart, it is a skill-based game. We gave it a 65 in skill because squad building really determines how well you do in the game. Next we have strategy versus tactics. It's a super tactical game. We gave it a 75. Each turn, you're looking to do the most damage you can do to your opponent before he does it back to you. It ended up with a 25 in strategy because squad building really determines how well and how effective your squads are. Next up is interaction independence with an even 50-50 split. The game is divided between squad building and combat. Squad building, you're working alone. Combat, you're working against your opponent. Next up is immersion versus abstraction with a 60-40 split. We gave immersion a 60 because abilities are evocative of the troops they're trying to portray, and squad building does feel like you're building an army. It has a 40 in abstraction because any thematic elements that are there because of your own imagination. Simplicity versus complexity is next with a 40-60 split. We gave complexity a 60 because squad building can feel a little overwhelming with all of those options. We put 40 in simplicity because combat is pretty intuitive. Next up is portability versus grandeur. We gave it a 90 in portability because it's so small and compact. It doesn't matter how many expansions you have, it's not going to take up much room. For the last sliding scale, we have expandability versus completeness. We gave it a 70 in expandability because like any faction-based war game, you're going to want more expansions, and we've got a few to go off of already. We gave it a 30 in completeness because each box does contain 2 complete armies that can be rebuilt in different ways. And now we have our sliding scales. With originality, we gave it 4 trophies because as a tile-based war game, it's pretty unique in that it doesn't use miniatures. And for value, we gave it 5 trophies. It's just so affordable and so well produced. How could you not? And that's the breakdown for Pocket Battles.
We hope you enjoyed our take on Pocket Battles, and we really hope you like the new format. Next week, we'll be talking about expansions in the Chit Chat, and we'll take an in-depth look at Last Night on Earth.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel, see the links below for our Facebook and Twitter pages, and leave us a comment.
See you next week. See you next week.
All right, that's a wrap, cut.
Sweet, I'm out of here. See you guys.
Right on.
See you, man.
I like him, he's good. It's just, it's not the same.
I know.